Lenio, thank you very much for speaking with us. Your press release says, through on-stage exercises, dances, and rituals, she explores the forest as a place, both physical and imaginary, for the dissolution of identities and the metamorphosis of bodies. Linking Kaklea's choreography, environmental, and poetic richness of the forest for the first time, Fauve presents dance as another wild zone to be defended. Aha, wild zone. Therefore, when I was watching it, the very first part of it, your wonderful performers, it was very seductive, very sexy, a lot of staring at the audience, butt slapping, and so on. And I thought, okay, the defiantly seductive hip thrusts, ass slapping, throws down the gauntlet, as if to say the journey to the wild places is entered through the ass, hips, and seduction. Now, you were being provocative in that. You were trying to grab me by the gonads, in other words, in the beginning, correct? Now, Toni Morrison, who was a friend, and as you know, I was a great fan of her writing. Toni Morrison once said to me, in describing the easy allure and bold clarity of Brazilians, they have a profound sexuality, she said. Not this silly acting out we call sexuality, but something deeper, more profound, she said. Now, am I misplacing or misreading your choreographic strategy at the beginning of Fauve? Are you talking, is that the profound sexuality that she's talking about? Or is the silly acting out, which is the beginning of this piece?
It is the seductive game, the way it has been mostly choreographed by mainstream pop imagery. The first act, the first scene of Fauve is a very simple choreographic editing of very small excerpts I have seen choreographed in video clips like Britney Spears and Beyonce.
Yes.
So since the theme of the piece was wildness, metaphorically or literally, instead of proposing in the beginning of the piece, instead of proposing how I would think wildness looked like, I wanted to study of how seductiveness through animality or wildness is being choreographed and performed in mainstream pop culture. And this is why I decided to actually literally take very small excerpts from famous choreographies of Beyonce and Britney Spears and melt them in this very simple choreographic editing.
Now, of course, that is very intelligent, except that I am an audience. I walk in, and it's like I'm in a club, and there are these really good-looking people all around me doing this thing. I guess this is the question. The performers are young and desirable. I found this awkwardly focused seduction curious in a work that seeks to reclaim the individual intimate identity, to rewild dance, take it back from a world of Beyonce, TikTok, and commodity. Would this introduction be otherwise if the three performers were non-white?
Personally, I don't think so. The performers are from South Europe, meaning from Greece. We're all three of us Greek, meaning that we are submitted to very different colonial powers that are exerted in the European continent, with a history different than the ones that in the States. So whiteness is experienced or performed in a very different way in Europe. In my opinion, working with Greek dancers, living in Athens, having gone through a series of institutional major crises, is not exactly working with white people.
With white people or wild people?
white people.
Because to me, it felt like the setup, the problem that you were dealing with came from definitely a Eurocentric position. And these are people who have to learn how to thrust their hips, how to learn how to
Yes.
how to learn how to own sexuality. Now, I don't know, I don't want to confuse the Greeks with the Northern European Puritanism or whatever, that separation of body, but there is something about what Europeans, and now you say Greeks are different, what they think is wild in the body. And that's what I thought the piece was setting me up for. Now we're going to find out what you think is wild in the body.
Absolutely. It's interesting that, especially myself, having had a very academic background, a very academic studies in dance, and not being a very flexible dancer myself, it was difficult for me to incorporate these dances. Even today, after 15 venues and so many shows, I can still tell you that I don't like how I dance them. I think they look awkward on my body, and I definitely don't look as if I was entirely mastering them. So I thought that this distance between the intensity of the choreography and the way the low virtuosity with which it is performed, or the awkwardness that it might create on the body, I thought it was an interesting gap, and I'm not trying to hide it.
Right. So you want a certain level of unease in the viewer, because we're now moving into territory that we all feel a little awkward in. Right. Okay. Now, could you share with us something about your process? That being said, how was the piece made?
It's an interesting question, and I'll start by saying that this piece is a transition piece for me, meaning that it was a moment where I wanted, for the first time in my work, to work with very various material, engaging in both choreographic editing of pop movements, or pop vocabulary, but also working with what one might call minimalist choreographic scores, pedestrian choreographic scores, adding on top of that a text coming from anthropological inquiry, and working with visual elements, how can I say, foreign to contemporary dance, like the pole dancing.
Interesting. What the part that I call going up in the trees.
Absolutely.
But just for a moment then, what is the academic text? I know that there's references to someone describing being, what was it, attacked in the mountain or something? What was that text that you say that you laid on it? Could you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. It is quite revealing for my process to say that this text, which I have recorded for the show and will listen to my voice during the show, it's probably a text of a paragraph or so. It's a very short text, but it took me about a year to find.
What were you looking for? What did you want? What were you looking for?
I wanted to introduce. So this text comes from a real anthropological inquiry made by Charles Stepanov, who is a very important French anthropologist, and who worked with people in Siberia who still organize their community through fishing and hunting. So this text is a tale still alive, still said amongst these peoples. It's important to say that these people, the Nifk, both genders are both hunters and fishers, women and men.
Well, let's talk about gender. Oh, did you fit? Did you finish?
So this is where the text came from, and
Right.
what I was really interested in, and I hope I'm not getting into too much detail. What I was interested in this text is that it is what we called in anthropology perspectivism, meaning that the frontier in the story, the frontier between human and animal, is regularly inverted,
The people,
regularly confused.
the
And
people
I was
in
interested
this,
in that.
the people in this traditional society, they have this idea about animals that, where did the anthropologists get this notion that this was about confusing the boundary between people and animals? Where did this come from?
Confusing, meaning that it's very it's very revealing in the text itself, in the tale itself, because humans look like animals, transform into animals who look like humans, who are animals who are killed like humans, and become animals in the end.
Now I'm going to ask you to say that again, because it's one more time, please. It's very beautiful the way it tumbles out, but it's hard for me to grasp it.
I just improvised it, but it is the movement in the text between human and animal, meaning that it's a human talking about meeting an animal, but she discovers that they were human, and the humans dressed like animals, and they were killed like humans, and then she learned something about animals. Like it's a.
I think I see what you're going for. Yes. There was an artist whose name escapes me right now. She was, I think she was represented by Brent Sycamore, and she did large format drawings, very beautifully well rendered drawings of what looks like a woman naked, and she's sitting with a man, except the man is a gorilla. And they are in amorous, not overtly sexual, but they're private parts. And it's like they're sitting, and you begin to understand that there is something confused about why would it matter to me if it was an animal or a human. And she's behaving as if this is her lover. And so I did all that work. Just a little side trip. Do you think that who is responsible for the audience's gaze? In other words, people come to your work like I did, and they're looking at three white people dancing in the way that Black people dance. How do you feel about that? The responsibility of, is it the responsibility, or what about the conversation between your idea and what people may or may not see? I'm sure you must have thought about this a lot.
Yes, well, I think what's important is that the source, especially because I imagine that you refer especially in the first scene.
That's when it first occurred to me that
absolutely.
My eyes, I'd be responsible for my eyes. Right?
Absolutely. What happens is that the sources of these dances come from a very come from pop culture, American pop culture, which is present everywhere, at least, which is very present in Central Europe. And this is the kind of entertainment that we have been looking at, living with, fantasizing with, since we are very, very young, especially in Greece. So pop culture is a very available, over-present material that really composes the visual landscape in which we navigate. So that was the reason that I thought that it was interesting or even important to work with it, because because it is such a dominant visual and gestural landscape.
Right. In a way, it's almost become a kind of a universal language, like it or not. It's become rather universal. Young people in Korea, it's very present. In terms of back to the making of the work, I read some of your in some of your materials about, someone says you are ecofeminist. Does that sound right? Then I thought, okay, well, what is there to make of three people, two women, one man? Were those all, was there any significance to the three and that there are two women and one man?
Yes, I don't necessarily, I can't recall having used this
Somebody used
this
it.
term.
I
Yes,
apologize.
absolutely. I definitely don't identify with. I'm very constantly. I'm a feminist maker, very informed by feminist theories, but very far from being legitimate to talk about ecofeminism.
Is it a category? Do you think it exists, ecofeminism?
I mean, it is a spectrum of studies and thought that starts to be also very present, and many thinkers, activists, and scholars are engaging with and contributing to. But I wouldn't say that it's, the major. I'm not a very.
It's not what you're doing. It's not what you're doing.
No, voilà.
Yes.
Now, regarding the gender, it's interesting to maybe to mention that this is the first cast of the work. There is a second cast. In the second cast, we're all female. In New York, we're coming with the original cast. The male-looking dancer is a queer person. And Ioana, the female-looking dancer, and myself, we don't necessarily identify always as female, definitely not as stereotypically female. I didn't think about it a lot. I wanted to work particularly with Yorgos and Ioana. They were both Greek. We had a history together, having grown up in the same city. With Ioana, we were together students in the National Conservatory. And it was since it was a small group, an intimate group, it was a way for me to work with Greek dancers, and especially with them. And the question of gender was not. I knew I would be posed the question, but I just chose them as collaborators.
So it was an indeterminate choice.
Absolutely.
It ultimately doesn't matter. You're all in some ways gender non-conforming, right? That's what you're saying. There was this section that with the chain. The chain, and at one point, so I'm reading the semiotics of who has the end of the chain, who is on the other end of it, and there was this moment where the male identified person, male presenting person, is here on the chain, and there are the two women, the two female presenting persons on the other end, and there's some sort of power dynamic going on, and I'm thinking it felt like a story about Simone de Beauvoir or something like that. There's something.
Absolutely.
Were you playing with me in that way? What was that? What's with that chain?
I really love. There are two or three things to say about this scene. First of all, one of the things that I was really interested in was, again, something that I encountered by reading and studying Stepanov. He says that human rituals negotiate with both violence and affection.
Interesting, yeah.
And the use of the chain was a way for me to introduce this ambiguity of what how a human ritual could negotiate both with violence and affection.
And you understand that's
and form.
No, I should, and that's what the problem is in reading so much about an artist's work without seeing their work. I think, oh, there's a feminist critique going on here. That this is something about power, women, agency, the two women, and so on. It was very difficult to follow it through, and now I understand why, because you were not plotting out a critique. It was not an argument in it.
No, it's not. It's not. It's one of the pieces. I've done explicitly feminist work before. Explicitly, I mean in the sense of it is a theme and it's there's text, and it's really argumented and explained,
Mhm.
and the moment where I was, this is why I say that Fauve was a transition piece for me, is the moment where I really wanted to leave back certain documentary practices or explicitly feminist content, and I wanted to explore things in a more, let's say, poetic way, to say it simply.
Mm.
And this is the result of me working with hybrid with languages or movement material that are very incompatible,
Mhm.
and trying to figure out how I can assemble them in
Mm.
under a narrative theme, which was also the first and maybe the only time that
A
in a,
narrative. What is the narrative theme that we're talking about here?
well, Fauve,
Ah,
a wild animal, the
I
time,
see.
absolutely,
I,
which is
I see.
the first time and maybe the last that I'm choosing such a theme.
Right, of course. Now, this is back to the question. I think of something about the contract. I use this word with another person who's going to be on our season, Wally Cardona. I said there's a contract between an audience and an artist, and he said, "Oh, it's too harsh, and it's about power and I said, "No, it's in the work that I've done in social therapy and psychotherapy, trying to understand family dynamics. There is a contract one has with one's family. There's a contract one has with one's lover. There's a contract that a woman's body has in a society that is misogynistic and so on, a contract. But the work seems to resist metaphor or various conversations around gender, race, even history, theory of any sort. If it says no to those thought processes, what might it be saying yes to? First of all, do you agree that it is resisting metaphor? And
Yes,
the,
I agree, and I agree that it is resisting explicit um, uh, gender theory or critical theory,
mm-hmm,
and it is not that I don't. They have or institutional critique. All this has informed enormously my work as an artist, and many of my works manifested, demonstrated in a different way. But here I had, um, yes, I wanted to explore another territory whose contours I was not even sure I knew were.
for instance, at the end of this piece, I thought as you all climb those poles, I completely resist pole dancing. I didn't think about it. Of course, that seems so obvious. I was thinking, oh, there's something about the wildness is in a way they're returning to the trees.
It's
You know?
exactly that. It's
Uh,
exactly that.
uh-huh.
It's exactly that.
I see. But the pole dance is in there as
Well,
well.
what happens is that the moment you reverse the weight relation with the ground, and you don't have the ground supporting you anymore, you need
Mhm,
technique in order to stand up
mhm.
there. So pole dancing becomes a source of technique. We really needed to go through some pole dancing material classes in order to understand how it is possible to carry that weight up there, and
It's yeah.
especially for so long. So pole dancing was just a resource of technicality.
But ultimately, the image, I won't say the metaphor,
Mhm.
was these persons that we have been with now for how long is a piece? A little over an hour? Is that right?
Yeah, around
Yeah.
an hour.
And we've seen them go through some sort of metamorphosis, and now they're doing something that looks like it's almost as if there's a metaphor. They were returning to the trees. But this artist has led me to believe that she's not interested in metaphor. So I was saying, if it says no to those thought processes, what might it be saying yes to?
Mhm. Again, especially for this scene, I think the question is so relevant to how I tried to avoid the metaphor of grimper in French. I'm sorry, climbing up,
Mm-hmm.
climbing up the pole, uh, and yet I chose this visual scene exactly for that. exactly because it was evocating, we say, that.
Evocative of.
Evocative of, thank you, evocative of. But the way we perform it, the way we work with the pole is more concrete, is meaning
It's
that
like it's elemental somehow. It's an
voilà,
elemental element.
it's more about giving a moment to reveal how the body needs to organize movement-wise in order to actually perform this simple action, which is to hang up there for
So
long.
is the piece ultimately about performing?
Well, yes, and it is a lot about dancing, but this is a subtext, and I know that this is my intimate subtext. I don't, but when I started Fauve, and this, it's more actually obvious or more articulated in future works. I was very, I was very afraid. Let's say I was very afraid about the future of dancing. The
Of
art
your
of
dancing or dancing in general?
The art of making dance.
Oh, really? Interesting.
Yes.
Could you speak a bit to that? I understand the anxiety, but what could you say about that?
Well, I live in a sufficiently central place in Europe to be able to observe how the institutional tissue, the public institutional tissue is losing ground throughout the entire European continent, with all the inegalities that exist within it between the North and the South, the periphery and the centers. But still, it is too obvious to avoid the almost for the fact that the public system is falling quietly apart, and I'm
the
very
public
afraid.
system is the one that has been promoting the idea of dance as art. Now, the people will have their pop dance. The people will have their ritualized war and sex. But these artist class, you're saying, is being somehow they're deprived now, somehow they're no longer trusted.
Absolutely. No longer trusted and no longer funded. So I was very afraid about the dance as an art available to all. And that, and I'm still very afraid about that, but Fauve was a...
Well, just one last question, more general now, and you're touring this work around. You meet many different people. You're in many different environments. How are you feeling about the world now? Positive, negative? Do you have? I think your last answer said something about specifics as an artist, but as a human being right now, how are you feeling about the world?
I think we are going through obvious contradictions, social contradictions. On one hand, issues about race, sex, gender, class have entered the public discussion. They're visible, and civil rights advance. And at the same time, there is a rise of populism, both on the right and both on the left. And the rise of populism is a very different danger. And I think it's dangerous. It's dangerous for art. It's dangerous for democracy too. And I'm not. I can't be nor optimist or pessimist. I think that it is a new challenge, and we need to organize ourselves and be careful in order to not allow it to gain too much ground.
Do you think that you can be a progressive, searching artist and be on the right?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I don't think it's a
contradiction at all.
No, I don't think it's a contradiction at all.
Interesting. Yeah.
Well, I mean,
I don't know these people, but I know they must exist. I see them in popular culture and Hollywood. You know, they're real conservatives there. But in the art world, most people that you, at least in the world, the New York art world, the attitudes, I can almost guess what their attitudes might be. Yes. You know, but you think that that the art is no measure of.
No, I think that the popular represent. I think that the definition of what right and left is less simple to define, less simple to see.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure that these these political worlds are so different. Depends on where you stand inside them.
Yeah, and it almost makes the question a bit irrelevant in a way, isn't it? Yeah. Anyways, you are fascinating to talk to. The work is really a brain teaser. You know, I always quote Duchamp as saying, art is primarily an intellectual activity. And I took that to mean it comes in through the eyes and goes through the mind. And I say it comes in through the eyes, goes through the mind, and if it's really good, it goes through the heart.
I totally agree.
Yes.
I absolutely agree.
Yes.
So it's about passion, after all.
Passion. That's a good word, right? With all this thinking and that passion. Anyways, very excited that you're coming, and it's a pleasure to be in this life with you at this point.
Thank you very much. Extremely grateful for the invitation and very honored to have had this discussion with you.
Thank you very much. Be well. See you soon.